So welcome to our Elabor8 Meetup. My name is Sebastian Barney, and I'm going to be starting today's session. So in the spirit of reconciliation, Elabor8 and I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and recognise their connection to the land, sea and community. And we pay our respects to the elders past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. Today, James Halprin is going to be facilitating a panel discussion, a day in the life of a release train engineer, or an RTE. So James is an experienced enterprise agile coach and trainer and is passionate about helping organizations thrive in the digital age by leveraging lean agile principles, practices, and mindsets. As a safe practice consultant, James has deep experience helping organize, implement safe and embrace business agility. So welcome, James, and can I get you to start by introducing the panel to us?
Absolutely, thank you. Let me just share my screen. Just check that everyone can see that okay. Good to go, thumbs up, excellent, thank you. Welcome to a day in the life of an RTE. So as Seb mentioned, I'm the Safe Practice Director at Elabor8. And who's Elabor8? So we're an Agile consultancy, in case you're not aware. So we have been a safe transformation consultancy since February 2011. And we've helped many organizations over those years adopt safe. And that's just a few examples of some of the companies that we've worked with. I would like to welcome the panel members that are joining us today. Very excited to have Bernadette with us today. Bernadette's an Agile coach and release train engineer for Savvy Surgical and Propel AI and ML digital product companies. Bernadette leverages her knowledge and deep understanding of Agile to coach, train, and mentor cross-functional teams and leaders in lean Agile practices and mindset, continuous improvement, culture-first leadership, and strategic prioritization and execution towards greater enterprise agility. Welcome, Bernadette. Next, we have Richard Lunt joining us. Richard has over 10 years practical experience in the software development and broader IT industry. Richard is an experienced and qualified release train engineer who has supported business and technology transformations by driving more efficient and effective ways to deliver value. Welcome, Richard. And last but not least, we have Satish. Satish is an IT professional with 20 years of experience in product development, professional services, and capability development. Satish is currently leading an Agile release train with 16 feature and component teams that develop fixed, mobile and emerging tech products for Optus, enterprise, and business customers. So welcome to all our panel. So I thought to kick off, we should do a quick poll just to get a sense of people's experience with the RTE role. So let me just share my Menti screen. I'm sure you're all familiar with Menti. If not, super simple. Grab your phone or open a browser window, go to menti.com, menti.com, and just type in that 8-digit code sitting at the top of my screen, and then you can answer the question. What's your experience as an RTE? A, I've never been an RTE. B, I'm looking to become an RTE. C, I've been an RTE for 6 months. Or D, I've been an RTE for a year or more. Excellent. Can see some votes coming through. If anyone's having problems getting into Menti, let me know. Excellent. One more minute to cast your votes. See, we've got a few people that have yet to experience the role of the RTE, so that's great. Excellent. We've got some more coming through. Awesome. Looks like we've got one person with quite a bit of experience, another one in the 6 month, another person with some experience. Fantastic. Might get a chance from here to hear from you later in the call as well. Excellent. That's great. Let me pop back over. Alrighty, so what are the responsibilities of the RTE? So if I look at the standard definition of the RTE from SAFE, it describes the release train engineer as a servant leader and art coach who facilitates art events and processes and supports teams in delivering value. They communicate with stakeholders, escalate impediments, help manage risk, and drive relentless improvement. If we go one step deeper, though, and we ask, what are actually the responsibilities of the release train engineer? So many of you are probably familiar that the latest version of the framework 6.0 was released in the middle of March this year. And one of the nice additions that they've added to the latest version is what they're calling these responsibility wheels. And that's actually what we're looking at the moment. And so they took a step back and said, if we kind of distill roles into like kind of 4 or 5 key responsibilities, what would they be? And this is what they've decided are the responsibilities at a high level for the RTE. So first and foremost, they're responsible for facilitating PI planning. I don't think anyone's going to be surprised to see that. That's obviously the seminal SAFE event. They're responsible for supporting PI execution. So once all the teams have come together to do their planning and they're off sprinting away, obviously they're going to need support. Next, coaching the art. So the RTE is essentially a Scrum Master is to a team, a release train engineer is to an art. So it's not surprising to see that coaching is a big part of it as well. This next responsibility, probably a bit less familiar with, this notion of optimizing flow. So flow is always been a big in SAFE, and it's really, there's a lot more guidance around flow in 6.0. And then finally, improving relentlessly. So at a high level, they are the 5 responsibilities, but luckily we've got some experienced RTEs with us on the panel today. So we're going to road test and see whether they're actually valid, or perhaps there's some responsibilities that we haven't caught at all. So with all of that said, let's jump in. Let me stop sharing my screen now. And let's start throwing over to the panel members. So I think a good place to start might be just to get them to briefly introduce themselves and describe how they found themselves in the role of an RTE. So maybe I'll throw over to Rich to get us started.
Thanks, James. Yeah, so my I guess my experience started about 10 years ago when I first started in a software development company, having been previously a network engineer for a product-based company. Spent a lot of my time on site, seeing the end result of our products and being very close to customers. Then moved into a project management role within our development department, and that started my sort of journey towards RTE. So I spent about 5 years as a project manager slash Scrum Master, getting to understand how sort of teams operate. And then the business decided to bite the bullet and go SAFE. So I started working to my way towards an RTE position. So yeah, it was a good journey. I think having seen projects and a software development company delivering in a waterfall manner, really, I guess, took the blue pill and went down the whole Agile rabbit hole, and saw just how much more effective it was at being able to delivering value incrementally, getting closer to the customer, and all those good things. So it was a fairly slow transition from network engineer all the way through to Scrum Master, and then finally RTE.
Yeah, fantastic. And what about your path, Bernadette? How did you find yourself in the role?
Yeah, so I started in IT consulting way back as a BA, and I remember one of my first experiences on a massive transformation, major program transformation, and we were doing waterfall, and I absolutely hated it. And I thought, I don't know about this stuff. I don't think this works at all. But fortunately, some of the leaders in our consulting firm also bit the bullet and caught the agile bug, and they started going down the scaled agile pathway, and we introduced SAFe to our client, and I soon found myself on a transformation which I was the design lead for, and then very quickly moved over to a Scrum Master role, which was very exciting because I could get my hands on and I could see the quick flow of value and get rid of some of the bottlenecks that I was experiencing as a BA earlier in my career. So yeah, that's how I jumped in there. And then I guess that went from sort of Scrum Master to Agile Coach to what we called value stream coordination, value stream manager, which essentially was supporting the client RTE, and then at subsequent organizations took on that Agile program management role, which was the RTE role. Yeah, so that's how that happened for me, which is couldn't get off the train since. So
that's great. And Satish, I'm sure you've had yet another different path to get there.
Yes, James, thank you. And I started as a tech BA and moved into project and program management, similar to what Richard was calling out. And also I was managing a portfolio. But within the Optus product development, there was a bit of a transformation that was going on, especially they wanted to move away from a waterfall way of doing to agile way of doing it. There's a good reason why they wanted to do it. But again, since I had the agile experience prior to the transformation, so I just jumped on to help with the transformation, and we were pretty successful in terms of moving away from the waterfall way of doing to the safe agile, incorporating the safe agile framework, I should say. And I just got this gig as an RTE, which I thought I didn't have much idea when I started as an RTE, because safe was fairly new. I thought it will be quite simple as a Scrum Master. Jesus, it's an interesting journey, and we launched with one train with probably 12 teams when we started, and it's been almost 3 years. We grew from 12 to almost 17 teams with 140 to 150 people now, and also we have subdivided the train into 3. So that's my journey.
Fantastic. Yeah, how hard can it be, right?
Exactly.
What did you sign yourself up for? That's great. So as we saw from the responsibility wheel, SAFe calls out the 5 responsibilities: facilitating PI planning, supporting PI execution, coaching the art, improving relentlessly, and optimizing flow. Do these responsibilities actually resonate with you? And maybe we'll start with Satish on this one.
So, absolutely, James. Again, this is the effective part of the RTE's job. And again, let me just touch on facilitating PI planning. This is a what do you say, long subject, because this is the core component of what the RTE does. But even though the heading is a bit misleading from my perspective, it says facilitating PI planning. But I'm sure whoever has done this RTE role, we do a lot of pre-planning activities. That is where lot of planned workshops, working with the business owners, working with the product managers, and also the architects to ensure that we are aligning the dots. Again, within Optus, because we develop product for the enterprise customers, we do the pre-PI planning 6 weeks before the actual PI planning. And that I would say that is one of the most intense period, wherein you have to do the planning activities, and also you have to ensure that the execution of the PI planning is also going as planned. So basically it's doubling up of my work, but again I will leave it to other RTEs to pitch in. So that is where it takes a lot of Jesus out of me with all those planned events. But the better the planning, the smoother the PI planning is.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's only going to be as successful as the amount of planning that you put into it.
So that is on the, do you want me to touch on all the subjects, James, or I'm happy to, or you wanted to rotate?
Oh, that's okay. Maybe we'll get Richard. Do those responsibilities resonate with you, or is there any one that kind of stands out in particular?
Yeah, look, I think you mentioned it before. I was actually going back and having a look at SAFE 5 because I remember it being quite vague, like at least the article on the release train engineer. So with those SAFE 6 updates, they've done a much better job, I think, of summarizing what the RTE does. I think it adequately covers it, but it's obviously only the tip of the iceberg. You know, you read through the article, it calls a lot of other things out. And there's a hell of a lot to it. So, you know, it's a high level summary. You know, from what resonates, I love that they put the coaching the art there, because I think in the sort of 5 or so years that I've been doing the RTE role, it's not immediately apparent to people that the RTE plays that role within the art. Obviously, event enterprise coaches as well, who help support, and you have your Scrum Masters within the teams. But it's not until sort of over time that people start to realize that the RTE plays that pivotal role at coaching the art as well. So I'm really glad that they've included it in there. It just sort of helps advertise what the role is. I think particularly when you first start and people are all new to the roles, to SAFE, in some cases Agile. So I think that one's the one that sticks out for me.
Yeah, fantastic. And what about you, Bernadette?
Yeah, other than the coaching part, I think, and it does come into this, but optimizing the flow and the continuous improvement side of things, you know, we're continuously, relentlessly improving the way that we work. We're empowering our teams, we're helping them, we're coaching them to identify how our ways of working and how we can do better, so that we can essentially get better at estimation, that we can get better at all of our practices. And yeah, I think that really stands out to me. The optimizing flow really is a really key call out here, because it's essentially, how do we unblock our teams? How do we ensure that from an execution perspective that we're minimizing dependencies, or that we have a really clear understanding and management of our risks and issues across our teams. So we're, you know, obviously trying to structure things in a way that we are minimizing handoffs, we're reducing bottlenecks and all of that lovely stuff that comes into a sort of lean agile. But yeah, there's so much to it, isn't there? Especially it depends on the organization so much as to what those dependencies and I guess blockers of flow look like. It might be higher up from an organizational structure perspective, or it might be between teams. So it takes on many different flavors, and I guess to that point, each day is very different as well. Kind of keeps you on your toes between mentoring and coaching and facilitating. There are so many different roles that you have to take and be aware of, and also bring others on that journey and develop them as well in these skill sets.
Yeah, definitely not a role for the faint-hearted, that's for sure.
Definitely not.
So speaking of which, so yeah, I agree. I think 6.0 definitely does a good job of distilling the high-level responsibilities. But if we spun the question around and said, is there one thing that's maybe not called out in the responsibility wheel that you find you end up spending a bit of time on anyway? What would that be? Satish?
Thanks, James. I'm happy to go with this one. What one thing it doesn't call out is, like, people think RTE has a magic wand. That could be from the teams and also from the leadership level, wherein, like, all the blockers can be easily addressed. But in saying, if I have to elaborate, I think SAFE could spend more time to elaborate during the PI execution. One is, like, obviously, like, as Bernadette was calling out, like, the coaching aspect of it, that's very well articulated in SAFE 6.0. But what I feel is, like, the RTE is also expected to resolve people-related challenges within the team, which is like, which comes as part of the coaching, but again, like, it's slightly bigger than coaching, I would say. And also like, RTE is involved in the recruitment, because if there is any skill set gap, like, it becomes an RTE issue to go find people, do interviews. It's just like, and most of the development team is like, I wanted the resource yesterday. So I don't know, these are the things which becomes ad hoc RTE task, which is not very well captured in a way. And also like, working with the IT team in terms of like, when we have CI/CD and there are certain challenges, and the RTE has to wear a technical hat to guide that team to see like, how we can address the blockers, and also like, we do say optimize the flow. So if there are any challenges with the IT or release, it impacts the whole flow, and SAFe is a flow-based system. So yeah, depending on the situation, the RTE has to wear different hats to resolve them.
That's a really great point, that you do have to have a very broad set of experience to be able to, excel in the role, because when something goes wrong, someone's going to want someone to fix it. And normally that person has RTE in their title. That's awesome. What about you, Richard? Is there a responsibility that's missing?
Well, I was actually going to say, I think they cover it all, but, it's sort of, you can draw the line between some of the things that they call out as the high level dot points. But I think Satish hit a couple there that I think resonate quite well with me, particularly around the line management type responsibilities. So obviously they don't call it out as part of the responsibilities within SAFe, because it can be different at every organization. But I often find that that inevitably becomes part of the RTE role. So I think that's a really interesting one. And I think further to the point that Satish makes around like technical competence, and what you touched on there, James, is you do need to understand so many things at a certain level, because you've got to be able to understand how to unblock things. So they don't really call that out as much as I guess they could. Understand why they don't, but at the same time, it's something that you absolutely need to have as part of your skill set. Enough understanding of so many things, including technical things, particularly if you're talking about a software development train, things like that. Understanding things like CI/CD, DevOps, all of that. You need a fairly broad breadth of experience. On the train that I'm on at the moment, we're a heavily regulated industry, and I've had to go down the rabbit hole of compliance and all of these sorts of things. So they don't call that out here, but I find myself spending a lot of time on certain things at different times. And I guess it depends on where your train is as well. You sort of wear different hats for a period of time depending on where the train's at.
Fantastic, the glue in the middle. And what about for Bernadette?
Yeah, I think I just want to touch on probably plays in a little bit around the people management, but also just your stakeholder management side. When, say, the rest of the organization doesn't have a lean agile mindset or practices in place, and really what is limiting the art is actually maybe waterfall or traditional practices outside that are inhibiting the flow. So I think it's kind of like the RTE becomes a spokesperson and almost the change agent to try and get the rest of the organization on board with these ways of working. So I think that I found myself in roles like and situations like that where I was essentially trying to expand the transformation from just the art to a value stream organization where the rest of the business, and many times you'd find that the business would be on board, but the challenge there is quite enormous, and having the right people on board. And I guess that coalition of the willing, getting more of a coalition going towards that transformation is in itself a big job, because like I said, often the inhibitors or the risks and the blockers are could be outside the train or the trains. So bridging the gap between business and IT has been a big one for me, and the RTE role there is smack bang in the middle.
Can I just jump
Yeah.
on that one, James, as well? Like, I'm nodding furiously, and I think that's so important. The role that you play as an RTE, representing your art when you have all those other challenges that need to be solved as well, that you become acutely aware of the RTE, that you're constrained or impacted by those, and therefore you have to start branching out. And that comes back to what I mentioned before about the coaching role. It's not just, you know, within the art, it's also very much external to the art. Again, depending on where you're at from a business transformation perspective, where your train's at, all of that type of stuff. So I couldn't, emphasize that anymore.
Yeah, it's like you need to be excelling at communication, and you're like the big connector that's connecting all of these different things. Whether, you know, we're not working in this perfect, you know, agile safe bubble. There may be waterfall teams and vendors and other things that we've got to connect with. There's business and IT, and are we all aligned, moving in the same direction? And it's kind of falling to our role to kind of get all that to work together. So that's great. I'm seeing that there's a couple of questions in the chat. One is, does the RTE has any role to play in prioritization? What are your thoughts on that one?
I'd love to touch on that. Prioritization is one of my bugbears, because I've certainly experienced that it can, if it's not done well or done at all, it is one of the biggest blockers to real delivery of value for the business and for your organization. I'd say yes, absolutely. And this is a place where I find myself coaching executives at the, I guess, portfolio levels outside of the train, around first getting that portfolio level, solution level prioritization right, and doing the right things at that level, getting the right practices in place for prioritization to occur there at portfolio, and then for that to sort of cascade down into our release trains. Yes, very much so. Not that I'm doing the prioritization, but there's the coaching around what that is at our key executives, for our key executive stakeholders, and then all those involved sort of at the solution level for our trains.
Yeah, great call out.
Facilitating.
Yeah, you're not doing the prioritization, you're facilitating the overall process.
Yeah, and I'm just seconding that as well. You know, it's just drawing the attention to just how important it is. And I think similar to Bernadette, I've had experience where, you know, you're impacted by potentially portfolio prioritization not working as well as it should. And as that work comes onto the art, you sort of left floundering a little bit as to what is the prioritization. And you almost need to, I've seen the train having to make those decisions where, you know, they shouldn't necessarily have to make those.
Yeah. And another good question, how about the RTE expected to be a project manager too? Are they expected to follow every story or epic to see the fulfillment? So what is that? You know, is an RTE a project manager, or are they not? And where's that difference?
I can jump in there if you like. It's definitely not a project management role, but sometimes you do have to put on these hats where there is some sort of project management, I guess, you know, to put it in inverted commas. But it isn't a project management role. Obviously, you've got teams that are empowered, and you want to make sure that they're taking on accountability of their deliverables as well. So it's different from project management. But obviously, there comes, you know, there are times when you commit to work at PI planning, etc., and you need to wear that hat, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe, James, if I have to add something, because I was doing project management for a while, and moved into program and also portfolio management. But when I moved into the agile way of working, including RTE, I have to undo a lot of stuff. Because as a project manager, I mean, I'm sure, like, you know, I will get bashed for this, but I'm happy to just, like, you know, say this. As a project manager, sometimes what happens is you direct people what to do. And it was much easier for me to do it. Like, you know, you have to wear your leadership hat and just say how to do, what to do. Sometimes what happens is, if you're becoming a project manager, you come with a technical background, and you have some of the junior engineers or, like, you know, developers, and probably they are struggling, and you have so much of urge to tell how to do things. when I moved into the, in the Agile framework, and also started developing the coaching ability, I need to. There's a background noise, but okay. So I have to undo my leadership quality, but I have to become a servant leader, wherein I have to facilitate and get people to arrive at a solution without me giving a solution. That was like a very hard task for me. It took some years to master it, but I'm still not there. Sometimes I feel like, I might as well just tell the guys what to do it, but I restrict myself to do it. So that's because this is more like, the Agile way, or even RTE. It is a collaborative effort. It's a team effort. So it's not what do you say, my way or highway, or not that aspect. So probably it's too direct what I was trying to say. Maybe Richard or Bernadette can also add to it.
Yeah, I can. That resonates with me a lot. I think something that I've actually noticed, sort of moving from one train to the next, is because I had less understanding of the work. I still have understanding, but less understanding than what I had previously on my other train, was I naturally took a step back, and that's been good for me, because I think that if you know too much, that the natural tendency is to sometimes go in there and just fix it, and to tell people, and to micromanage and things like that. I think that's the worst thing that you can do, because it actually starts disempowering teams, and it starts changing the culture and changing the behavior. They're just expecting the RTE to come in and fix things, and you start to become like a program manager, or I'm going to go into that minute detail and manage at the task level. So you've got to be really careful, because sometimes there are situations where you may need to step in to do that, but you really want to do that as a last resort. And to Satish's comments around coaching and things like that, servant leadership, try and put that hat on as much as you can. Just not always easy to do.
That's great. There is definitely a big pivot between those two roles. There's a related question I wanted to ask, which appeared, which is, how much autonomy are you given as an RTE to run the teams in a way that's optimal? Is someone project managing the RTE and telling them what to do, or is the RTE an empowered role?
Oh, that's a good one. I like it. That's very juicy. I think it in my experience, it has largely depended on how, my leader, right, the person that hired me to do my job, and in some instances very empowered, essentially, and the from a direct leadership, at sort of the executive level, those that are maybe sponsoring or the train or the area, there's been times where very much empowered. There have been other, I guess, waterfall and traditional governance processes and things that have been a bit cumbersome, but very much, I've, at least in a recent, for the last organization that I work for in this role, very much empowered. The problem is when there are multiple stakeholders from a client perspective, or if you have a client that isn't used to, if you're delivering a product or something to a particular client, and you're the vendor, which is a current situation of mine, and there's not a lot of empowerment there. Perhaps that's what I found to be quite an interesting experience. But I think, as the RTE, you are protecting the teams, and you're trying to create that environment, and you're trying to coach upwards to that sort of executive level, those that are sponsoring you and the train and what you're doing, but also doing the coaching for the Scrum Masters and the team. So I think often it is a harder job, because the harder nuts to crack are those in those executive roles that maybe have not the kind of mindset that is that easy to gel with this lean agile practice and mindset. So a little bit of both in my experience. Definitely, I think that the important thing is to be very very clear on what it is about, what is the role about, and to set that expectation up front, and to remind people and to remind those on the train and those sponsoring what this is about and how we're going to work. And I think that really does serve us in terms of getting that empowerment to run things the way that, well, not run things, but facilitate and be that servant leader so that the whole the teams and the trains can really to be empowered to deliver value.
Awesome. That's some great insight.
Maybe, James, if I just have to add two sentences
Sure.
here, because the RTE is sandwiched between the leadership team and also the Scrum team. So initially it is quite challenging because you might feel you aren't empowered, but with time, and as Bernadette was saying, you need to protect the team, and also once you provide that psychological safety for the team, then you become a go-to person for the team. That's how you build the trust with the team. And similarly with the leadership team, it's not easy, whether it is prioritization or to have any general discussion on the development. But once you develop the trust, then you become a go-to person for them too. So in other way, you have the soft power, I should say, and they look at you from as a consultant, as a and also seek guidance. So it's empowering in that way, if you ask me.
Yeah, that makes sense. How do you find people interpret the name, the role RTE? It's a bit of a strange name, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a bit of a silly one for me. I always struggle a little bit with explaining what it is and the name and everything else like that. I'm not sure. I haven't come up with a better name, but it is always an interesting one. I think it doesn't adequately kind of cover what the RTE role does. That's probably my issue with it.
Yeah.
And
Satish, how did you go down being called an RTE? What did people make of that?
I think it has some kind of a technical connotation to it. They feel like it's more a release engineer in a way. And people feel even the leadership team, sometimes when we have the corridor discussion, they'll just ask the technical question, and we might have to come up with a much better name, to be honest, because it has that technical connotation, and sometimes it's very difficult to explain, as Richard was saying, for people who have not experienced SAFe, and it's it takes probably 2 or 3 minutes to explain what the role is. So probably in SAFe 6.0, it says we are a coach too. Probably I would prefer to call as an agile coach than RTE, but
yeah. Well, I think Anthony Little's saying that too. He's saying lead program coach ?
Yeah, I think the only problem with that is that we're moving away from program, aren't we? So it has been one of those really contentious titles, and I was a little bit surprised to see that they didn't change the title. I was really hoping they might, but I think SAFe, it's one of those things that is very particular to Scaled Agile Framework, and regardless of the exact name for it, it has caused a little bit of confusion, but I've also been, people thought I was some sort of engineer, and I'm so far from being a software engineer. It's not even funny. I'm a big picture, connect the dots person. I do have an understanding of everything, the system, architecture, but no way am I an engineer or a release manager. So yeah, that's been
it's the engineer part of it, and I think that sends you down the wrong path, I think.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah, they definitely leaned into that train metaphor, didn't they? Agile Release Train, a release train engineer, and yeah, interesting. It is well known though, so people know it now.
Sometimes it's not a bad thing, because then at least you get the opportunity to explain what it does. So to Satish's point, they go, what's that? And then you get 2 or 3 minutes to actually start spouting the gospel, so to speak. So you can kind of use it to your advantage sometimes, but if you're doing it 10 times over, you start getting a little bit sick of it, trying to explain what it is.
You have your elevator pitch down pat now. So we've talked about lots of different things. Let's bring it back to sort of the theme of the meetup. What does a typical day look like for an RTE? All these different responsibilities, all these things going on. What does your day actually look like? Maybe throw over to Satish to get us started.
Sure, James. I would divide this, or maybe I will answer this in two parts. One is during the PI planning, and we all know that, right? It's a 2 days event. It's a very structured event, and RTE is responsible for the PI planning, and also he or she, the RTE, facilitates the event, and we all are across it. We know what actually it entails. But the other part is during the execution. That is where the pre-planning activities comes into play, and the last iteration wherein the RTE has to plan for the PI planning, including the inspect and adapt problem solving workshop, the demo, and during the execution you do have now we call it as coach sync, but previously it was called Scrum of Scrum. We have to facilitate the system demo, and also all the retro feedback what we receive, either at the team level or even at the program level. When I say program level, at the end of the PI, so that it becomes an RTE responsibility to chair the LACE workshop. LACE is Lean Agile Center of Excellence, wherein how you can work on continuous improvement. And following that, I saw a chat which says as RTE wears even a product manager hat. Sometimes what happens is if depending on the product manager's availability, even the RTE chairs the PO sync, which I do in a way. And also working with our not only with the leadership team, but also with the partners and vendors to ensure that they are available to support us during the execution, and also ensuring they are available during the PI planning event. So if I have to, that's how I would sum it up in a nutshell.
Okay. Richard, how does your day look?
It depends where you are. Every day is different in the PI, I guess. So, some days I can be checking in on teams and scrummies and visiting daily stand-ups and just making sure everything's, going okay, asking if they need help, that type of stuff. Other days I can be madly scrambling to secure rooms for PI planning. I can be coaching, coaching at all sorts of levels, at team level, at exec level, that type of stuff. So every day is different. Which is great, which is what I love about it. But yeah, typical day, spend a bit of time in Azure DevOps or, Jira, your tools, understanding how things are flowing, turning up to product owner syncs, those sorts of things to make sure that, the work's there's a flow, a continuous flow of work coming in through discovery. You might be getting prepped for a prioritization event. So yeah, look, it's the beauty of the job is every single day is different.
Yeah. So maybe there isn't a typical day.
Probably not.
Bernadette, is that your experience?
Yeah, I think it's looked very different for me depending on the organization and the size of the team. So I think when I started, we had, I think, 3 release trains, and I was coaching across those trains, and it looked different in that I actually was also supporting a team as a team coach at the time, so that was a little bit in conflict. But yeah, we would be looking at preparing for the next quarter, so working with all the different product owners and the product manager and the client to be essentially, I spent a lot of time supporting and coaching product owners and product managers. And then, the other part of it would be working with the solution or enterprise architects, even needing to establish architecture forums so that we're getting all of our architectural runways sorted when perhaps that wasn't well coordinated. And and looking at, I guess, prioritization. So working with executive, I'd spent a lot of time in maybe more heavily governanced PMOs, trying to transform that into a LACE, into a more agile center of excellence. Yeah, I think depending on the organization, this has been very different. The last one didn't adopt tradition or like strict SAFe, so it was kind of trying to do it a little bit on the sly, and trying to move towards that. And I think there is certainly appetite, but it was a long fight to get there. And for those teams, it was working across the organization, trying to fix even just the org structure more broadly within IT to make it more conducive to a product and a release train. So yeah, very, very varied. For me, I'm working with 2 very small product, almost tech startups at the moment, and spending times literally just working on the go-to-market strategy with the CEO. So that's kind of the space at the moment. And then doing a lot of client side on the other product, where essentially trying to protect the team and working on and just sort of smoothing out some of that communication and heavy governance with the client.
Yeah, fantastic.
Just as an example.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of variety, that is for sure. I do want to open the floor, leave a couple of minutes free for people to jump in and ask some questions. So I've got one more question I'd like to throw at the panel. So in SAFe, we always talk about that famous troika of roles, don't we? We've got the release train engineer, we've got the product manager or managers, and system architect or architects, depending on the size of our train. Love to hear from you guys. How does that relationship really work? Do you really work closely with these folks? How important are they for the success of the train? Maybe we throw over to Richard.
Yeah, look, you have to work so close, and it's ultimately it's going to make or break the train. I think how well the RTE works with the product manager and the system architect. Their role on the train is to empower and enable the teams, working with the architect and the product manager to making sure that there's a continuous flow of features of work coming through, that they're getting explored, that we're talking to the customer, we're understanding what's the next highest priority, highest value epic or feature coming down the pipeline. Obviously, the architect is a huge part, or plays a pivotal role in that, because they need to be laying down that architecture, working with the teams to make sure that the enablers are happening. So if you're not working well as a trio, you're going to know about it pretty quickly. You'll start to see things getting blocked on the Kanban. There's not good flow. So absolutely make or break, I guess, the train and whether or not the train's able to deliver value and deliver that value for the customer. So key.
Yeah, partners in crime.
Yeah.
Satish?
I do concur with what Richard is saying, James. And again, we are the essential leadership group, who steer the ship in a way, because if the trio is not working collaboratively, obviously it impacts the team, and also you can see the energy that flows from the program level to the Scrum team. It's very different. So unless the three team members, or probably 3 groups, I should say, if they are working in a synergy, then that certainly helps even our Scrum team to accelerate, maintain the velocity. So it's very essential from my perspective.
Yeah. Great. And Bernadette?
So I was just reading some of the comments. I think the big thing around this is prioritization. So the RTEs is trying to balance and bring together the product or the key value, the functionality, but also from a solutions. So that's more the product manager's interest, and often the the architect would be looking at the technical enablers, and they'd be prioritizing the technical side of things. So the RTE is coming in together and working with them to help facilitate that conversation and that prioritization. And often the RTE, I guess that's what is so important about the separation of these roles as well. That happens in a similar way at the team level, between, say, the product owner, the Scrum Master, and maybe there's a tech lead, or maybe the team. But it is pivotal in that, we're calling out this, I guess, power trio, really, to bring about the balance across what we're delivering towards essentially the continuous value delivery, but our key objectives for the PI, but also more broadly for the enterprise organization on a longer term. I guess we'll touch on it, but often what happens is the RTE might end up having to roll up their sleeves in one or more of those areas. Maybe if one of those other roles are not being filled, or maybe there's an experience, or so that's certainly been my experience.
Yeah, fill the gaps.
Yeah.
Couple of questions around accountability. I'm still not sure what the RTE is held accountable for: the plan, the increment, the organization's agility, etc. What are your thoughts on accountability?
I think I just love this question. And it's one that I also have to ask myself all the time. And I have to bring people back to collective ownership. But yes, the RTE, look at the remit of the RTE, essentially. And that's what's important to call out here. I think what's mentioned is organization's agility. The RTE is first and foremost looking at a release train, or what maybe be a more traditional program. And I think that is the coaching remit that they have. But as I mentioned earlier, that they've also got to help unblock by trying to, I guess, be that change agent for the organization more broadly. So I think immediate accountability is within that release train or the Agile program. So that would include, yes, the plan for the quarter, the plan at an incremental, and how that rolls up to maybe into a bigger solution, which might span across multiple release trains. And I think maybe in Satish's experience, and certainly in mine, I've been the release train across multiple programs. So that becomes a little bit interesting. But it's maybe first and foremost looking at that. I'm trying to understand the core of this question in terms of,
I might jump in here just because I struggle with this one as well, like you do, Bernadette, as far as articulating this, right? And maybe I'm interpreting the question wrong, but I think in a traditional waterfall setup where you've got a program manager and project managers who are on the hook for saying that we're going to deliver what we said we're going to deliver, but that's in a waterfall way where you're technically supposed to know everything up front. Like it's not that. Right. And that's sort of how I look at it, because obviously, like, things change, things adapt. So, whilst we commit to things at PI planning, and obviously we want to try and deliver those, we're also within that trying to be agile and understanding that things are going to change and everything else. And it's not all about, that the fixed scope, that type of stuff. So I guess coming from a waterfall setup where you're going, okay, well, it was quite clear that the project managers are responsible for delivering what they said they were going to deliver 6 months earlier. It is not that. And it is a little bit vague, I think, when you come in, when you're new to Agile, you're new to a release train, exactly what is the RTE on the hook for?
And just on the back of that, Richard, I'd like to add that in organizations where it's someone's fault if the plan is not on track, or if it's someone, we haven't met our PI objectives perfectly, and therefore, this is not the case. I think I came into a new organization where that was one of my concerns, that I was going to be, hauled across the coals because if we didn't meet our objectives. But actually the approach is no, we have collective ownership and we learn and we continuously improve. We are continuously looking at how we improve as a team, and there's ownership across the teams. So really it shouldn't be just on one person to deliver and to be held accountable for a whole, like, multiple teams. And yes, you're coaching, but there's, I guess, that whole fail fast mentality. All of that comes to play, and it's a really important conversation, I think, to have around accountability, and reflecting on our values and principles in Agile, that it is collective ownership, and there's a different mentality. You know, if we fail, it's not on one person, or if we don't meet, or if we miss an objective, it's actually everyone's responsibility, if that makes sense. I think obviously when it comes to contractual milestones with clients, there is some level of, you know, complexity there, but I think hopefully that sort of answers that question. That was just very refreshing for me with my new organization, to have that realization that everyone is actually on board owning this together.
Yeah, absolutely. We're just about out of time. I'll ask one quick question to Satish. There's a couple of questions in the chat that are sort of related. Can I ask the panel if they still have project and program managers where they work? And a kind of related question is, have any of you had support from an SPC, and how was it? So are there still project and program managers on the train?
Thanks, James. I'm happy to take that question. And again, like, you know, I'm an SPC, but in saying, like, you know, do I have program or project manager on my train? And probably, like, you know, that is what Richard and Bernadette are trying to say. Moving into Agile is a mindset. You know what I mean? So it is not a triangle with scope, schedule, and cost with quality at the center. I mean, we all understand what that is. But here it is the change of mindset. Some people have embraced it. Some people loved it, liked it. But when we went through a transformation, there were a few people, they did say, like, you know, this is not for me. That is the honest truth, because they did say, like, you know, facilitating, and they felt like, you know, they were slightly disempowered in a way, and they did not like it. So certainly, like, you know, they looked at other opportunities, because Optus is a large organization, so they moved into a different business units. So you need to have a passion and also a different mindset to move into it. And for me, obviously, it was a bit of a journey when I started, but I have to retrain myself. And it was a bit hard to start with, but certainly I'm loving it. And as Bernadette was also calling out, in the typical project management, one person will be held responsible. That's where the responsibility / accountability comes into play. Whereas here, it is, you know, there is a good reason why we call this as a cross-functional team. Yeah. But the advantage of this team is it is not the Scrum team and the RTE and product manager and architect. Even the leadership team is part of the team. That's the beauty of it, because it gives so much transparency. If something is getting missed, it is not a surprise for them. They know what is a good rationale behind the miss of the PI objective or what it is, and they work with the team to see, like, you know, how we can improve on the delivery or outcome. So that's what I love about it, James.
Yeah, fantastic. We are at the hour. There's so many great questions. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. I did want to obviously thank the panel. Really appreciate you sharing your insights today. That was absolutely awesome. Also wanted to call out, we are running a release train engineer course if you are interested, obviously, in learning more about that later in October. And we also have another couple of courses coming up as well. But look, thank you to everyone. Really appreciate you joining today. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.